Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this SFI Pilot Policy Update for this month. My name is Louise Maguire, and if you haven't met me, I have the privilege to lead the SFI Pilot team and the Test and Trials team. And I think we're joined by both farmers in the pilot today and Test and Trials. I'm joined with me, my colleagues, Sam Dovey, who I'm sure you met before, who will introduce themselves. They're going to help me do the presentation today, and Liz Harding-Wyatt. But before we start, just a brief on housekeeping. So if you've joined any of our previous webinars, these will be familiar to you. But just to run through them very quickly, if you do need any help, please let us know in the chat. So obviously this is being run as a webinar, so you can see us as the panelists on screen. You should be able to see a set of slides, but you will not be able to see each other. There is a chat function available, but we do have a Q&A button. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A button to submit it. I would advise you to listen to the presentations first because you may have a question that we answer within the presentation. So please wait for us to finish the presentation and then we'll give you some time to input your questions and to review the ones that's there as well, as you may have already, the question that you may be thinking about may have already been asked by another person that's attending today. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can today. There may be some questions that we can't answer and we'll need to take away. If you do have any specific questions about your agreements or your individual circumstances, I would recommend that you email those to the pilot learning team or the rural payments if it's about an application that you've got, and we've got the web addresses there. And just to note, we can't answer questions about specific agreements because of data protection. But if you do have a general question, please do ask and we'll get through as many as we can of those. So just before we start, just to provide you with a purpose of today. So we made an announcement last month to update you on where we were with Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier. And today is just about running you through that announcement and what we announced on the higher tier actions, but also the SFI endorsed action as well. And we'll also tell you a little bit about what's happening in the pilot. So we'll do the higher tier update first, then take you through the endorsed actions and then go what's coming up in the pilot. And then we'll have a little bit of the time at the end to pause for a Q&A. So firstly, I'd like to hand over to Sam, who's going to take you through the Countryside Higher Tier update. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Louise, and afternoon to everybody. Good to see you all on the call again. Happy New Year. As Louise said, just wanted to take you through, just have an opportunity really to sort of go through the Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier announcement in a little bit more detail. Hopefully lots of you had seen the announcement and have read the details that we published in December. But just a quick recap, that Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier now forms one of our 3 environmental land management schemes. So it sits alongside the Sustainable Farming Incentive and Landscape Recovery. Obviously, Sustainable Farming Incentive, which we're all very well versed with because we've done lots of work in developing that scheme, and those pilot participants with us today, have been an instrumental part of that, and those in Test and Trials who've been helping sort of build the building blocks of the scheme. And that's quite a sort of a large scale scheme that's sort of open to all on a sort of standard basis when you apply. Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier is a bit more of a tailored scheme. So it's most of the schemes are written individually and they target the most environmentally or sensitive or complex sites, to look at protecting, restoring environmental features or enhancing those features that are there or have been identified, and also doing some work to look at things like species management, protection against flooding, and mitigating climate change. And as you can see on the slide, in January, as of this year, we have around 4,700 higher tier agreements from previous rounds in place. And so you can see that compared to sort of a handful effectively of landscape recovery agreements in our rounds 1 and 2 of those, but then the sort of 25,500 SFI agreements we had in the SFI 23 round, and then that sort of growing number of agreements in the expanded offer. You can sort of see the numbers and where that fits. And what we've been doing as part of the environmental land management scheme process, we've been expanding and improving higher tier to sort of fit in the sort of more Elm type wrapper and workings, and trying to build on the improvements that we've seen through SFI in terms of operating that and managing that with yourselves. So moving on, in terms of the update, what we published earlier, or so earlier this year, but last year now, actually last month, but last year, was an update about what you need to know to prepare to apply. So if you're thinking about a higher tier type agreement, or you've got a more complex site, or you've looked at SFI and you think we can't really see how that sort of fits in some of those. So we've published a little bit more information about how to apply. I'll go through that in a bit more detail. We've published some details of the land management actions. So those of you that have been familiar with some of our previous schemes, you'll know in Countryside Stewardship, we used to call them options. But again, along with the being more aligned with SFI and how we're sort of moving our environmental schemes going forward, they're now actions. So there's 132 of those that are currently available, will be available in higher tier. We've also included the capital items that will be available as part of the higher tier agreement, because they're higher tier tends to be a revenue and capital agreement combined together, because it's tailored, looking at particular outcomes and particular areas together. So we've included those, and there are 25 new items that will support some of the outcomes that we're looking for in higher tier, and also the draft terms and conditions, so you can have a look through the terms and conditions, see how they will pan out and how they might differ from what you've had in the past. So that's what the publication was essentially. And then in terms of what we've done within that, we've explained how what you can do to prepare, but particularly sort of higher tier will be subject to having sort of a plan in place, a feasibility study or management plan, something that will identify the particular outcomes, the particular land types, the assets or areas that we want to include within the scheme, and then our arm's length body, so principally Natural England and the Forestry Commission, will work with people that have been invited to apply for the scheme to sort of build the basis of an application in what we call pre-application advice from now, really from this month. And what we're going to do is, I think it's next month, plan for next month, we're going to publish a bit more information about how if you're not on an initial invite list for the first round of the higher tier, how other people that are interested or feel that they may have the elements that would fit well in higher tier, how they can apply. Next month we'll publish a bit more detail. The plan is that actual application, so being able to go into the system, log in and apply for a higher tier agreement, will open later in the summer this year. So what we're doing now is all this sort of pre-work, working with our different organizations to work up what an application would look like, make sure it fits, and it's going to be deliverable for you and acceptable to us. So all that work goes on in the interim. And then the applications can go in onto the system, and currently it's planned that it will be the similar system to that for SFI. So you'll be able to log into the RPA portal and select the higher tier option and apply. And we're looking to sort of expand how that will work, who can apply, and bring that online, even more in a sort of more comprehensive basis over time. For those that have got existing agreements, particularly those that have got existing agreements with higher tier that may be coming towards the end this year, we will be offering mirror agreements for those, so that you can just continue on rather than having to start again and go through the whole pre-application process and do that. You will have an option to be able to continue, and also for those of you and farmers around the country that have got the sort of the higher tier, so the HLS, so the Environmental Stewardship HLS higher level agreements, we'll also be offering some shorter extensions. I'll run through those in a bit more detail shortly. But again, just to provide some continuity while we're rolling out the scheme, rolling out the new system, we'll be offering some extensions to those as well. So that's sort of really the basis of the announcement. In terms of what's new in higher tier, so the principles of higher tier, as I've explained, is it's targeted, it's the more complex sites. But what we've tried to do is to do what as we've worked through for SFI, both based on how we started in the pilot, going into the early SFI, the SFI 22, and part of the 23 SFI 23 offer. We've gone through, we've looked at how we can make existing actions more flexible, and how we can remove the prescription that we've previously had in the schemes before. We will bring in some of the elements, some of the operational elements that we've had in SFI, like the rolling application window when it's open, the monthly start date, so they won't all be 31st of December expiry or 1st of January starting like they have been in Countryside Stewardship before. And as I said, you'll be able to use the RPA portal service to apply. So it'll all be quite consistent with other schemes and work together. We're also, and the payments will be on a quarterly basis as well. So everything should, although it's, an existing scheme that we've been working for and reviewing, things should feel much more consistent with how we've been dealing with SFI and the ELM schemes over the last couple of years. So that's quite a good move forward. In terms of eligible land, so this does remain quite similar to before. So it can be land, it can be woodland, so it could be farmland, woodland, land managed for nature, as it says there. So some of the more extensive areas we can include. Part of the tailoring process and the targeting is to include some of our more important environmental sites. So those with designations such as the SSSIs, and we can, so again, in line with how we've been developing, and again, this is a change since we started the pilot, but land that are in other agri-environment schemes will still be eligible for higher tier, but just subject to our principles, our usual principles of eligibility and compatibility and double funding. So quite a wide range, and we'll have a map that can be annotated to make sure everything will fit alongside each other and is eligible. And then who will be able to apply? So this is quite a big question, and I know we've had a few queries about this since the launch of the additional information. So initially, it will be an application by invitation. So I think we're looking for, in the first sort of year, this 2025-26 year, we're looking for around just over 1,000 new agreements. So that our sort of target would be to have 1,000 new agreements in place over this year. So initially, it's going to be by invitation, and it will be for those that that have been working with or had contact with Natural England Forestry Commission and have been doing some of that work. So there'll be people that, for example, have got a higher tier agreement that is due to end this year. Or people that have already got an approved woodland management plan in place, so perhaps have done quite a bit of the work, the exploratory work, the feasibility work prior to our previous round of higher tier closing, so didn't actually get an opportunity to apply, but it's all in place, it's ready, again, in the sort of non-woodland side, on the environmental agricultural side, those that had been sort of planning to do that and having all of that in place, but just missed out in terms of times and dates to be able to actually make an application. So it's going to be by invitation. Initially, it's going to be for those that we've sort of had some contact with, doing some work with, are sort of ready in place to go, because obviously that will help us we can manage that sort of pipeline a lot easier, and we can bring people in and we can test the system and make sure it works. So I think there's going to be, and there's already identified around 900 of those ready to go. And I think even in the first week, so last week, we had sort of planned that from the beginning of January, we would start inviting those people. So I think in the first week, there were 100 farmers and land managers that were invited to apply to start their application, start that sort of process and go through. And I know certainly having correspondence, I know that there are some pilot participants that have been having those discussions with Natural England Forestry Commission, who've received, been in part of that invitation, which is good, news to know that it's happening. So over the next couple of months, we'll be bringing more, sending out invitations to more and more people to apply and bring that forward. In terms of actions, so as I said, 132 land management actions. Many of these are sort of new or they've been improved. So there's been if you've looked at an option in previous schemes and you've looked at it, but there's been certain elements that wouldn't have worked for you, it is worth having a re-look at them again, because as I say, we've tried to review them, we've tried to simplify them, remove the prescriptions where we can, and change them around, make them more sort of more palatable to more people. And they are actions that, as it shows on the slide there, pretty much around creation, managing, restoring different types of habitats, managing existing woodlands. So there's no woodland creation in higher tier because that's currently catered for through a separate scheme, so the England Woodland Creation offer. But managing existing woodland can fit well within higher tier. Specific animal and plant species, so looking at some of those, particularly the native, non-native invasives, looking at managing land to reduce flooding, heritage features, and also something that's been hotly awaited is the permissive access, educational access, improving and expanding access is also going to sit within higher tier. There are around 59 of the 132 are similar actions to those that are available in SFI. So you might look at them and think, well, I've seen that somewhere else, and that's because they are available in SFI. And we've looked at those and looked at where we think that they could work across both types of agreements. But obviously in SFI, the action will be fixed, and it is what it is. And through higher tier, there is an option, there is an ability in the sort of pre-application work to tailor some of those actions. So if they need a slight tweak to make them fit to improve the outcomes or to working with other actions together, then through the higher tier, we do have that option. And there are some that perhaps were too complex, perhaps some that we would have liked to have put into SFI, but really looking at them and being practical about them were too complex. So things like the high density agroforestry actions, where we've got to you sort of sometimes move into the environmental impact regulation areas, or looking at restoration of lowland peat, looking at water tables and management of that has quite a lot of far-reaching implications if you do that. So we've moved that into higher tier, and even upland peat. So we've put all of the sort of moorland type grazing actions into SFI because we felt that we could bring those into SFI and give the flexibility to agreement holders through that. But the upland peat we've kept into higher tier at the moment as well. So it's those types of changes in the divisions. I'm going on to the capital offer for higher tier. So in higher tier capital, there's 151 capital items, and that does include 6 planning items. So there are planning items that we have had around. I think there's a new planning item. There's a species management plan, which look at some of the invasive species like grey squirrels and deer, and some of the non-native plants and things. So we've got one of those, but then we've got the usual implementation plans, feasibility studies, woodland management plans, agroforestry plans. We've got those, and they're available. And as part of the initial conversations, we probably would be expecting sort of 1, if not 2 or 3, depending on your individual circumstances, for them to be completed prior to. But as part of the overall application, you'll still be able to apply for those. But we've also got 25 new items, things that can help with creation and restoration of ponds and species management, and some of the woodland management. So we've got some new actions, capital items in there, so worth looking at some of those as well, because they've changed from the previous offer. And then just existing agreement holders, moving on to that, as I mentioned at the start, we know that there's obviously quite a few few of you that have got existing higher tier agreements running but are coming to the end. So what we've said is that any agreements that were expiring at the end of last year, so as long as you're continuing or able to continue delivering in the way that you were able to under those agreements, we're offering a 5 or a 10-year, depending on the agreement type, extension for existing higher tier agreements, just to keep that continuity, to keep that running. For those HLS agreements that expired last year, we're offering 2 years extensions for those, again on a similar basis, although they may well have finished, as long as you continued the management and can continue to deliver the outcomes that would be subject to the agreement, we're offering extensions. And then for HLS agreements that expire this year, again, we're offering either a 1 or a 2-year extension just to keep some continuity in place while we roll out the scheme. And I think we've already sent out over 500 offers to those existing policyholders, so they can continue that continuity. Obviously, I know a very frequently asked question is about how you can end an existing agreement, whether that's an existing mid-tier, higher tier HLS agreement, to move into either SFI or to be able to apply for the new higher tier agreement. And we are going to publish a bit more detail. So as we said, there'll be a bit more detail about how people can apply that aren't on the initial invitation list coming soon, and also how people can end existing agreements to move into the new offer when they're able to apply. So just to summarize from me, just this is sort of the process. So initially, in this coming year, once we open, or with it's going to be by invitation on a rolling monthly basis. So we've already started that 100 invitations have gone out, and that will continue to go on a month by month basis over the coming months, with actual application, so physical applications, starting in the summer. And our plan is that in this first year there'll be over 900 people will be asked to invited to apply. And then, Natural England Forestry Commission are going to start working, and in some cases, Historic England start working with those applicants to develop an application so it's ready to be able to apply later on. And we're going to we'll publish a bit more detail about how you can apply if you're not on that initial invitation list, if you've been thinking about it, and also how you can amend your agreements. So really, hopefully that's a useful summary. We can pick up any questions that haven't been answered in the Q&A later on. What I'd like to do is hand over to Liz now, who's going to take you through the SFI, the endorsed actions, and also gives you some updates on the pilot and the work we're doing with you on the pilot. So thank you, Liz. I'll hand across to you.
Great, thanks, Sam. So just to put this into context with SFI, really, with the CS higher tier, and how applying for SFI may also be on your mind, and how best to do that, really. So if you are in higher tier or looking to apply for it, you can still apply for SFI. But the 3 rules, like Sam mentioned earlier, is making sure that you and your land are eligible, that the activities or the outcomes that you're being paid for are compatible between those schemes, and that you not be paid twice for any similar activity or outcome on the same area of land. So that's the double funding that we've mentioned. And then for those with a pilot agreement, this, again, very similarly, you can apply for the full SFI scheme now if you wish, but do make sure about those 3 rules on the left-hand side of those slides. So in many cases, not everything will be compatible between the 2 schemes. So if you are looking to fully replace your pilot agreement, you will really want to do that the day afterwards your pilot agreement expires. So then you can apply for SFI on all of the land that was in the pilot, to give you a little bit more scope. Like I say, if you want to apply now while you have a pilot agreement, you can, and then apply later on to mop up that land that might have come out of the pilot. So there's some options there for you as you transition and end your pilot agreements. So once you've applied and you've accepted your new SFI agreement offer, it will start the first day of the following month. And we've got some links here. We'll put them in the chat and share these presentation slides afterwards. But do go through the Find tool that will have all the details of each of the actions and some compatibilities and what you will need to do for each of those. But in the meantime, do ensure that the land details and digital maps are all up to date. And as you may know, you apply for SFI through the Rural Payment Service. And like we say, in terms of higher tier, we'll be publishing more information soon on that. And like Sam mentioned, we've got some endorsed actions, which was also part of the higher tier announcement. So there is one SFI endorsed action already, but the announcement is that we will be releasing some more. I think it's 14, 15, 14, yeah. So these will mean that an advisor from Natural England or Historic England will check that land or feature is suitable for the action. And the one that is available now in SFI is a species-rich grassland, which is GRH6, which some of you may be applying for or have already applied for. But there's 14 more that are looking to come out around the summertime, the same time as the CS Higher Tier. We've released some information on this early to help you understand what will work best for you. So is it an SFI endorsed action that you should apply for, or to do something as part of a higher tier application? So both have different ideas and benefits. And also for us to publish it early, we can then make sure it's working for you, listening to any feedback for any tweaks and changes before it's formally announced and released for applications later this year. So if you are looking at these and are interested, do make sure that you check they're still the same when you come to apply. So these new 14 endorsed actions are covering, so for farmland, wildlife and habitats on grassland, for heritage, for wood, pasture and parkland, for orchards, for coastal habitats and for water bodies. And also do see what's best for you in terms of the application processes. So these endorsed actions subject to the approval process are fixed and can't be changed once you've applied for them. If you need a slightly tailored approach, then the CS Higher Tier route and equivalents might be worth working through for your applications. So do keep an eye out for these. And of course, applying through SFI, you can link it with the rest of an SFI agreement, and it can in some cases be a bit of a quicker and more efficient way of getting the agreement than it would be through higher tiers. So it's something for you to weigh up, read up on and see what works best for you. Now there are capital grants as well. So Sam mentioned how there is some higher tier capital grants which you can apply for as part of your higher tier applications. But just to give a bit of background, the budget of 5 billion has been allocated for the farming and environment over the next 2 years. And this is the largest amount ever dedicated to supporting sustainable food production and nature recovery, which is fantastic. However, we do have to go quite careful with how we spend that. I think last year's capital grants absolutely trumped the previous couple of years. So we just have to manage it careful. Manage the demand, which has been exceptional, and make sure we're allocating it in the way that works best for us and the best for you as well. So that has meant that the SFI capital grant is temporarily paused. We don't have a date exactly of when it will be reopened, but we will look to release some more information soon on what's happening next for that. Don't forget, there is the CS Higher Tier, which has got the 151 capital items, 6 planning items as well. So that can help with lots of different things. And there's still other grants such as the Woodland Tree Health grants, protection and infrastructure grants as well. So again, there's some links here when we share the information. You can go through and take a look or search any of this up on gov.uk. And then just a little bit about the pilot and how it's been going and what's coming up. So we've got a lot of numbers here, and it's just to show you the growth of the pilot over the past few years. with our main bulk of pilot agreements hovering around the 800, just over 800 mark over 2022 and 2023. And then with the release of SFI, we experienced a little bit of a drop towards the second half of last year as people were looking to go into the SFI 23 schemes. And then since the 31st of October, pilot agreements have begun to come to an end, which is really sad for us. And so as of January, it's dropped down to 289. So we issued quite a lot of pilot agreements back in 2022, October, November, December. So that's the majority of pilot agreements are coming to an end now. And then next month we'll be down to just 120 agreements. So a number of pilot farmers do also have an SFI 23 agreement, and many are applying already for the expanded offer as well. And what's coming up for you, either in the remainder of your pilot agreement or as you've finished, there will be some closure surveys, which you may have already seen, depending on when your end agreements are. We'd be conducting with some exit interviews as well. So all of these are really important to see how things have moved and changed, and how your opinion has changed or stayed the same over the course of the pilot, and now how you feel and thinking about your future, really. So that's all really important. We're releasing a participant feedback report, probably February, March time, and we'd love to share and go through that with you. You may remember we've done one in 2022 and 2023. So a report summary of what we've learned about each of the different actions and standards and how that's fed into the larger scheme. We're planning virtual and on-farm face-to-face events. So the virtual ones would be with the participant feedback report, but also as your agreement comes to an end, if we can, we'd really like to see how things have been going afterwards. So we'd like to catch up with you through some virtual discussion groups, keep you updated as well. And our partners at the University of Oxford are hosting a series of on-farm events, peer-to-peer networks and things like that happening on farm. And of course, we'll be saying goodbye for those that are having their agreements ending. And we'd love to keep in touch, really. So do keep in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and do come and see us at agricultural shows as well. There's always a series of DEFRA supported shows, and we do our best to go along to those when we can, really. So that's what's happening in the pilot, and I think it's time to hand back over to Louise, and we can go through some of your questions.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed to Liz and to Sam for that very helpful overview. So we've got around 10 to 15 minutes for some questions. What I'll do is just give you a moment or two, just have a look at the questions that have been input. If you can't see it, there is a Q&A button. If you're on a desktop, it should be at the bottom of your screen. It's just got a question mark on it. You click that, just read the questions. The team have been busy in the background answering some of your questions. So they're at the tabs at the top when you bring up that icon. So some are open and some have already been answered. So please check the answered ones as well. So I'll give people a couple of moments just to have a check. Before I do that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody that has supported us, whether you've been in the pilot or whether you've been in tests and trials. Your feedback, your input has been extremely valuable in helping us shape what we do and where we go. We've never done anything like this in DEFRA before in terms of test trials or even the pilot. So it's been, I can personally speak for me and the team, it's been great to work in these areas and to hear what you have to say and to work with you to improve the scheme. So just to answer a few of your questions that we're getting through in the background. So in terms of tests and trials will continue. So we are intending to do tests and trials in the future, but they are going to be focused on the new government's priorities. So we'll be sharing more details of that with you very soon once we've worked that through with our new ministers and where they want to go. Obviously, sadly, the pilot is coming to an end. We're in the third and final year of the pilot. There is still lots of learning that we need to do, and we are still keen to work with people who still want to work with us who have been in the pilot. So if you want to do that and you haven't let us know, please do let us know, and we will make sure that we will keep your details so that we can work with you in the future, because we'd like to continue this relationship we've built up. So thank you very much. So turning to the questions, we've got quite a lot of questions on ending agreements early to enter into our new schemes. So I'm going to hand over to Sam in a moment, but just on the pilot, I think you'll all be aware that the pilot itself, you will have to wait until your pilot agreement expires, and then you can apply for SFI if you wish to do so, if you wish to apply for SFI. So you do have to wait and then make the application, and then work with the RPA to set your application live following making your application. So there will be a gap. We are trying to minimize that gap as much as we possibly can, but you will have a gap between your agreement. So we recognise this isn't ideal, but we've heard different reports. Some people really like the idea of having a gap because that helps them think about what they want to do, how they're going to do it, perhaps align them to other agreements that you have in place so they all start on the same date. It's also the case with people that have got a Countryside Stewardship mid-tier agreement that ended on the 31st of December, and they will be in exactly the same position as pilot farmers. So we recognise it isn't ideal, and we are trying to address that in the future. But unfortunately, for the moment, for the pilot agreements that are coming to an end and those CS mid-tier agreements, there will be a gap between your agreements. So that's the pilot. Sam, are you happy to take some of the other questions that we've got around ending agreements early to enter either into higher tier or the new SFI scheme?
Yep, I'm very happy to try. Yes. Are you happy to go through them and then I can provide an answer if that's
We've got one person wants to move from HLS to SFI or CS higher tier. Can they end their agreement early?
okay. So so within your terms and conditions, you can end your agreements early. That is there are in terms of the sort of penalties to doing that, it does depend upon where you are in your agreement. So if you are sort of towards the end of the agreement year and you've delivered everything for that agreement year, then that payment would be made, and that's fine. But if you wanted to amend if you wanted to end your agreement sort of midway through a year within the term, then obviously the payment for that year would not be able to be made because you wouldn't have delivered what you had undertaken within the agreement to do so. So you do need to sort of consider the point at which you might want to come out of one of those agreements. So you can do that. Obviously, you could do that and potentially go into SFI, and you could apply in the standard way. In terms of higher tier, as we sort of outlined in the presentation, if you end your agreement, you would then need to sort of be part of that sort of rolling invitation process, or wait until we've published more information about if you're not in that sort of existing area or cohort of farmers that can apply in the first year, then you'd need to sort of find out then when it's likely you would be able to apply for higher tier to replace HLS. So we are going to publish more information about switching schemes, but that's certainly the position we are in at the moment. So you need to think quite carefully, if you've got an existing agreement, when would be the right time to come out of that agreement.
Thanks, Sam. That's helpful. We've got a supplementary question. I'm just trying to keep on to people that are in schemes and want to end their agreement early. That we've got another gentleman who has a current mid-tier agreement and wants to know if they can terminate that early and move into SFI.
So yes, so again, that's the same. So I must admit I didn't say too much about mid-tier this in the presentation. Obviously, the plan for mid-tier, those that are in mid-tier, is that the majority of the the options that we had in mid-tier are now really catered for in SFI and the SFI action. So that's sort of the replacement for that, and expanded and beyond what we were offering in the mid-tier offer previously. So but the same principles would apply. If you want to come out of mid-tier, you are able to come out of mid-tier anyway when you want to. If it's midway through a year, so mid-tier obviously is 31st of December. So if you wanted to come out midway through this year, you are likely to forfeit any payments made for any sort of delivery in this year. But if you get to the end of 2025, for example, and you're 2 years into 5-year agreement, then you can come out, at the end of that year, and then you can apply for SFI.
Thanks, Sam. That's really helpful. The team's just put some links in as well to the chat to some of the information that we've published. So please do take a look at those, and that will tell you a bit more detail about some of the things that we took you through in the webinar.
I'm just going to re-add those links actually, Louise.
Yeah.
I don't think they've quite worked, so I'll put them through now.
Thanks, Liz. Perfect.
Questions.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, everybody. That was my technical failure there.
Thank you. So let's move on to some of the questions that we haven't answered. So we've got a couple of questions, Sam, on permissive access. So when is permissive and educational public access coming into SFI, and do we know when? And what does permissive access include? Does it include multi-user paths, i.e. cycle, bridleways, shared paths?
Yes, so in terms of it, so the first part of the question, in terms of it coming to SFI, I don't think at the moment we've got any plans to bring it into SFI. So we did consider where it was best to sit in terms of how we, where we put it in, how the agreements work, how the advice, delivering the right things in the right places, targeting the areas. And so I think at this stage we felt that it was worth putting it into higher tier. A lot of them were really, I think there may have been some mid-tier agreements that managed to get a bit of permissive access, but generally it was a higher tier or an HLS type thing before, so we've continued with that. What we would say is that if you've got an SFI agreement, or if you are having an SFI agreement or planning to apply for an SFI agreement, you can still have a higher tier agreement that would have the permissive access in it as well, on top, as I say, subject to it being compatible, eligible to do that, then you can stack those agreements, so it's not a either or. You can have both. So you could have a lot of your land management actions through an ongoing SFI agreement, and then in due course you'd be able to look at permissive access through higher tier stacked on top if everything sort of aligns and works together, which would be the case in whatever scheme it was in. In terms of what we're allowing, so those are shown in the documents, and that now Liz has very successfully put into the chat. So there is I think there are 6 or 7 permissive access. So there are for creating new permissive access in particular circumstances. So cycleways, bridleways, footpaths, and open access as well. And then there are also some actions for upgrading. So if you're looking to upgrade something from, say, a footpath to a bridleway, or looking at reduced mobility, so to be able to get more people out into the countryside, there are some actions that will help do that.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Sam. If we move on to a question from Tracy, are the Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier capital grants available as standalone grants, please?
Right. Thanks, Tracy. Really good question. So effectively, no, they're not. Some of the capital grants that are available in higher tier were some of those that were available in the standalone. So the same as the ones that were available in the standalone, which, as Liz outlined, has been paused at the moment. But they're not available currently as standalone higher tier capital grants. So they have to be part of the sort of worked in application, the tailored application that would include the revenue actions and the capital actions working together to give the outcomes that we want.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a question from Anne about how we're getting on with making these schemes available on common land. So again, a really good question. So I think, and particularly online applications. So that is something that's in the pipeline. We're working on that around how we make it the applications on land for people in common land. If you do wish to apply and you are on common land, I think the line is to contact the RPA. Sam, is that your understanding?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as we know, and as Anne knows very well, the common land side does bring another layer of complexity. The actions and the scheme has been built around having common land in there, so the eligibility is still there, but the practicalities of getting that onto the system, always presents us with more complex challenges, and no change with the higher tier. So I think in due course, if you're in discussions already, if you're one of those that have been invited to apply SFI, or you've got an expiring agreement, an HLS agreement on common land this year, I think you'll be having those initial conversations with Natural England Forestry Commission, as you would anyway, and then we're working on how that process of getting them in and on the system is going to go.
Thanks very much, Sam. We've got a question from Daniel around, will there be any new actions in SFI this year? I think what we can say, Daniel, at the moment is that we are reviewing the actions that we've got out there, what's working, what's not working, and why it's not working, and how we need to change it, and whether there are any gaps in the actions we've got. So I think our main emphasis is getting the offers out there, whether it be SFI or whether it be the CS Higher Tier offer, and then reviewing to understand how it goes, and then making revisions, updates on the back if it's not working. Sam, anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's all good. Yeah, I think that's I think our new ministerial team said they want to sort of look at optimizing and reviewing, make sure everything is right, is aligning with things, and so we'll be doing that as part of the general process with the SFI actions.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a question here on stocking density rates from David. So I'll just read the question out. I've got a bit of I'll tell you what we're doing on this, but I'll hand over to Sam, see if he's got anything to add. So the moorland options have a very low stocking rate. This is a huge difference between growing seasons in the north of England and the southwest, and clearly forage rates at different rates in different seasons. Will Natural England at a regional level have flexibility over setting a stocking calendar or not? So I think that's a really good question. I think what we have set up is an uplands task and finish group. So on that are stakeholders, but there's also farmers. There's some farmers from the pilot. There's some farmers that have been involved in tests and trials, and they are giving feedback on what of the action works in an uplands setting and what doesn't, and where the issues are, and how we can look at those. And I know these moorland options obviously come into that, and we will be looking at those in more detail through that group. So helpful to hear any feedback, and aware that conscious there is a piece of work that we're doing to look at those and see what's working and what's not. Sam, anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it, Louise. I think it's one of those demonstrations of where, like, the higher tier, one of the reasons, as I said in our presentation, that we've sort of got some things in higher tier, some things in SFI, but it does this, particularly the regional changes do present quite a lot of challenges to that. So that's why they're looking at all of those things now, and looking, even though we've just rolled out sort of SFI, looking at what's working, what's not working, and how we can optimize and improve that.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a question from Charles around the criteria being used to decide who is invited to join CS Higher Tier.
Yeah, so thanks, Charles. So initially, in the initial rollout, it are going to be, it's sort of, we would term internally like pipeline business. So it's agreements where we know we've already been talking to farmers or land managers about what they could achieve, what they've got on the farm. It may have been that they had a higher tier agreement that sort of had lapsed before, or knowing that they're coming out, or people that had expressed an interest. So it was a bit of an ongoing process before we started rolling out the scheme. So those that are in the pipeline that we know that they've got, or on the woodland side, if they've got the woodland management plan in place, we've already done the feasibility studies. So we've done that feasibility. We know what's achievable. We know how it could be achievable. That's the criteria that we'll be using certainly for this first year, to bring all those people in that are sort of waiting, and have done that sort of first stage. How we're going to bring in sort of the wider farming and land management community that have been sort of looking at this, or have been sort of enthused, or have got more confidence through sort of SFI, that have identified opportunities. We'll be publishing more information about how that will work, but initially it will depend upon what you've done, the work, and the conversations you've had with Natural England and Forestry Commission.
Thanks, Sam. That's really helpful. We've got a question from Anne here on, are we going to review and increase the payment rates for higher level stewardship? I think the answer to that is that we're not going to increase those payment rates at the moment. Sam, anything to add on that?
No. I mean, I think at the moment the current position is that we won't be increasing the HLS because we do, the intention is to move people on to higher tier, and there is that process, and that's why the extensions that we're offering is 2 years for those that are lapsed or already subject to sort of being able to continue to deliver, or 1 or 2 years for those that are coming this year, because the intention will be to get them into higher tier in due course.
Thanks, Sam. So we have a question from Lewis. I think this is a really important one. I think we've covered it, but I think it would be good if we cover it again because obviously we're getting this question a number of times. So if we have a current SFI agreement, but also keen to apply for, say, Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier, can we upgrade some fields from SFI into Higher Tier, given that it's going to be quite a long time before Higher Tier comes into effect? So essentially, can they take an SFI agreement out, then take out those options or end it early to enter Higher Tier?
Do you want me to
Yes, please,
go that one? So yeah, definitely the intention is to allow the scheme moves, particularly where you are looking to sort of increase the sort of environmental outcomes or what you can deliver on that. That's definitely the intention. As you can probably see from what we've been discussing today, and as I just said about the invitation, how you be invited to higher tier. It is a reasonably long process. It's going to be a long process as we relaunch the scheme and get back into that and get those underway. So I think if you've got stuff in SFI, or even looking at like some of the SFI, the endorsed actions, which are bring another layer of complexity into what you can deliver through SFI, it really is worth looking at SFI carefully to see what you can do, because that will be a quicker and a more efficient route to getting environmental management and the payments for those onto your in due course. If they're not stackable, so if it's not something that you could do in addition to your SFI actions, then there will be a mechanism to be able to move from one to the other.
Thanks, Sam. I think we've got around 5 minutes left, so I'll try and take as many questions are still coming in thick and fast, but we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. So we've got a question from Krista here. Sam, when will those HLS agreements come to an end in 2024 be invited to apply for CS Higher Tier?
So that's a good question. There have already been some invitations gone out. I think it does depend on the sort of end date of that agreement. So obviously some of the earlier ones would have had the earlier extensions out. So I think if you haven't had one already, it will be in the pipeline if it's applicable and if it's available. I would probably suggest that if you haven't had one and we're sort of expecting one, or particularly following this announcement of what we're doing with those, probably contact your Natural England officer to find out what the status of that would be if you have not had it already.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a question from Ian here. So I think Ian has been offered a mirror agreement for 5 years, but is asking, is it the intention that they can move to CS Higher Tier in the first year, particularly as they have additional land that they'd like to add into their Higher Tier agreement, which they can't do to their mirror agreement?
So I don't fully know the answer to this question, but or to fully answer the question, but it's not, as far as I know, it's not the intention to offer a 5-year mirror agreement and then enable you to move into one of the new schemes within a year. I think the idea, the rationale behind offering those mirror agreements is to continue to give you as the farmers and land managers some continuity in terms of agreement and payments and what you have to deliver while we're rolling out the scheme, rather than sort of those all coming to an end, because they always were tailored agreements and they were looked at very carefully before they were taken out and agreed. That there shouldn't be in the majority of cases a reason for that environmental delivery and that type of support not to continue. So that's why. As Ian pointed out, they are mirror agreements, so bringing additional land isn't an option on the mirror. So I think you probably would need to talk to your Natural England officer about that, or Forestry Commission if applicable. But also, as we said, to look at SFI on that additional land, particularly the endorsed actions, because it may well be that you can go through an SFI agreement and do some similar or perhaps some less prescriptive work through those agreements.
Thank you very much, Sam. So we've got some questions and comments from Charles. I think we've answered these before, but I'll just voice this one over. So these are around the HLS agreements that we've got held. Some are extended, in some cases up to 2027. The payments have fallen behind. I think we've addressed that in terms of we won't be increasing those payments. But what is the plan to address this important issue and plan for transitioning HLS to higher tier? So hopefully we've answered that to an extent in terms of being able to end existing agreements and where that sits, and how we'll be inviting agreement holders into the new CS higher tier. Sam, is there anything else that you wanted to add to Charles's question?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we do, yeah, we are aware of that, and that they are different. But there is the intention is there to be able to keep, we have to make some, we have to look at what is our priorities, and keeping that continuity, keeping some agreements in force while we roll out the scheme. We want to make sure that the scheme's right, that it works for arm's length bodies, so for Natural England Forest Commission, as well as agreement holders as well. And so sort of pulling everybody in all at the same time, is potentially a recipe for disaster, because it's been quite a, this is quite a change. The SFI was quite a big rollout. So we want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure that we give everybody the right amount of support to do that as we're rolling out the new scheme. So that's why we've sort of offered those mirror extensions. As I say, those that are coming for an end now, because those that are running to 27, 28 would have had mirrors given last year, the year before. So those coming to an end now are going to be offered much shorter extensions, a year or 2 years max, and that gives some indication of our intention to get them into higher tier and into the new sort of system, the new rates, the quarterly payments, going forward.
Thanks, Sam. I think we've got time for a couple more questions that I'd like to get through. We've got a question here from David. So I see in CS higher tier a new payment under capital works for wall repair, which is welcomed. Will this be available in SFI 2? And will the rates be reviewed?
So I can't give you an answer in terms of when it would be available in SFI. I think the wall repair a capital item is there in the higher tier because it does sit very closely or fits in with how we would expect the higher tier delivery of some of those actions to be done. So that's why I can't say. I'm not saying that it won't ever fit within the SFI space, but certainly at the moment it's a higher tier capital item. And in terms of payment rates, as I say, we will be on an ongoing. I think Janet has said in the past that some of our pilot and test and trial webinars, and some of them that we are committed to sort of keeping those under review, and all of the schemes will continue on that sort of review and optimization. So we are looking at those payment rates, but we do have a framework for payment rates, and we are conscious of needing to keep some continuity around those for existing agreement holders and new people as well. So that those things will be kept under review.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. We've got a question here from Timothy. Is it true to say that pilot farmers have been disadvantaged in not being able to sign up to SFI 22 and then 23, and now we only have access to 24? Are we not going to be worse off in the long term? So that's a good question, Timothy. What I'd say is that pilot farmers were able to sign up to SFI 22 and 23, and indeed did so. They could sign up for actions that were compatible with their pilot agreement, or in some cases in land that was outside of their pilot agreement. And many of our pilot farmers decided to do that and had both 22 and have live 23 agreements. And now the 24 offer, it's the much more expanded offer. It consists of over 100 actions that are there for you to pick and choose which one supports your farm business. So the offer that you've got on the table is much more comprehensive than we had in 22 or 23. So on that basis, you do have access. You do have a full access to those that applied to 22 and 23. I think it's also important to remember that we greatly appreciate what you did and what our pilot farmers have done, but also you got the pilot participation payment of £5,000 for every year. And that took into account that you were participating in the pilot and conducting those learning activities with it, which is something that isn't available in the wider scheme. Sam, anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think we're hugely grateful, and also grateful that all of you had access to these, effectively to the pilot standards, the bundles of actions together, before, even before SFI 22 was a thing. So because a lot of the work that we did initially in the pilot sort of was borne out in SFI 22, looking at the soil standards. We made some quite substantial changes to the soil standards, getting some feedback from all of you coming in, and that was always the idea. But it's only really SFI 23 and now the expanded offer where a lot of stuff that you've had access through in the pilot, and have had that in your agreements has been available to the wider farming community.
We've got some questions around mid-tier, but I think we should take those offline, Sam, because that's quite a few, and some people have sent us some bespoke messages, so we can pick that up offline. Before we finish, I've just got one final question that I wanted to answer quickly. Did I understand from Richard? Did I understand correctly that the round 4 tests and trials are proceeding in 2025? When can we expect greater clarity on their structure and timeline for moving forward? So, Richard, I'd hope to be able to share that with you very soon. So we are working through with ministers what their priorities are for the tests and trials programme, and we will be, once we understand what they are, we will be sharing details with you and about what the structure of tests and trials and the timeline looks like moving forward. So I'm sorry I can't share more details with you now, but it's something that the team are working on as a priority. And as soon as we finish that work, we will be letting you know what's happening and how you can apply and what the focus of the tests and trials. So I hope that's helpful. Sam, Liz, before we close, is there anything else that you wanted to comment on or cover?
No, I think the only thing I was going to say, Louise, is that I mean, we've answered quite a few questions, and given you the information that we can. It is really helpful to us to have all these questions. So it was a sort of a thank you for sending these in, even the ones that we haven't been able to answer live, because we obviously do record these and we've got the details, and it's very useful for us to be able to feed back to policy teams, RPA, and sort of all of our senior leadership team, the sort of questions, the frequency, the types of questions that come up, and what you're all, the questions that you're asking, or the concerns that you have, or the things that you're not particularly happy about. So it is a really useful opportunity for us to get those. So it's not gone to waste, even if we've not answered as perhaps as you'd like us to, or not been able to answer all of the questions. We do record these, and it's a great source of information for us to feedback, which we do feedback. So it's not in vain.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. And thank you very much for everybody to attending. Liz is going to just launch a poll there, short poll there. Please do let us know how useful you found it, and that will help us shape future sessions that we are. And again, thank you very much, as Sam said, for your insightful questions today. They are extremely useful and helping us understand the information that we've got out there and where the gaps are in that, so we can address those. But we hopefully we've been able to answer as many questions as we can. I think most people have answered the poll. If you haven't, please do so. We'll keep it open for a short minute, and then we'll close the session. Thanks, Liz. If we end the poll there, I think most people have found it very useful, so that's great to hear, and good to let us know if there's anything that you're expecting today that we didn't cover. Please just email us. Please do take the opportunity to follow up on the links that Liz shared with you in the email to find out further information. Again, hope we found that helpful, and thank you very much indeed to Sam and Liz for all their help today in the session. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Goodbye.